Welcome to Untethered to Rooted, a podcast that brings you a collection of stories around grief, healing, and identity. Hear from everyday people how grief and loss shape their identity and how their identity shapes the way they heal and process grief. I'm your host, Dana Daugherty, a licensed psychotherapist with extensive experience dealing with grief, both personally and professionally. And if you want to hear stories with gems and practical tools for healing, stay tuned for more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Today, we'll be exploring with our guest her experience of surviving foster care adversity and finding identity in becoming a survivor and a community leader. For our guest, Lexi Mattocks, her journey with becoming a guardian for her severely disabled foster brothers led her to becoming an advocate for differently abled people. She learned tools to cope with all of these experiences in her 20s and then realized these tools used in her 20s needed to change for her 30s as she navigates her new experiences entering motherhood. In my own work as a therapist, I've worked with transracial adoptees and people who have had mixed experiences in foster care. And often there's a sense of feeling alone in that experience until you meet other people who have had this experience. So I'm really grateful to have Lexi on here today to share her experience about how she navigated what was and wasn't helpful to her, what role models she needed to lean on, and even the lessons she's learned in her advocacy work. So by way of introduction, Lexi Mattocks is a South Korean adoptee, survivor, and advocate whose life has been shaped by resilience in the face of trauma. Raised in an abusive household, she became the whistleblower for her family's struggles while dedicating herself to protecting and supporting her 7 foster siblings, often sacrificing her own goals to ensure their safety and stability. After experiencing homelessness while completing her final year of college, Lexi found some healing through fitness and powerlifting. The sport gave her confidence, discipline, and a sense of identity she had never known growing up. Today, as she navigates entering motherhood, Lexi continues to confront generational trauma with honesty and strength, believing that true courage also means asking for help when it's needed. So, hi and welcome, Lexi. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm kind of getting emotional hearing the synopsis of my life. I appreciate you having me and being willing to talk about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate, honestly, you have endured so much, but you've also overcome a lot as well. And so I'm so excited to have you share all of that today and whatever feels good to share about today. And so I'll start asking you about just what are some identities that are important to you? I mentioned some in your bio, but I'm wondering what are some identities that are specifically important to you?
I think the identity that really hits home for me is being a caretaker in everything I do, not just only with my severely disabled foster siblings, but also with volunteer work, with advocating for disabled athletes, being a woman in STEM. I think constant caretaking, just being a caring person, always wanting to help somebody out. Hardworking for sure,
Yeah.
and resilient, absolutely, because of the way that I was raised. I think I had to be tough to survive, and resilience, putting myself through what I did in order to get to the end point to save my siblings and have them where they need to be. So definitely that sums it up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hear there's so much just in our prep for this and just knowing you a little bit, just there's so much to your experience and I'm curious, what's your connection to this topic today about just your journey of resilience out of foster care into becoming a disability advocate and just sort of adjusting your coping strategies as a way to heal and realizing like there are different forms of healing as well.
I think in general, the title of the podcast, Untethered to Rooted, really speaks to me because I went through really bad hardships growing up in foster care, and then advocating to save my foster siblings and have them be rehomed, losing the only parents I ever knew or had. Even though they weren't great people, they were the only parental figures I had. They were the only family I could lean on, the older, family who could help me if I needed help potentially. And I felt like I lost a lot of friends at that time coming out about my family situation. So I really was untethered. I was all over the place and not knowing who I was. I was in my early 20s, trying to finish college. You don't know who you are in your 20s. And so
Yeah.
I think learning how to navigate all of my traumas, learning how to be the best person possible for my siblings, allowed me to become more rooted in who I was and find out what kind of person I'm capable of being. Going from an extremely shy, quiet person to being loud and saying, hey, this is all that's going on, and asking for help. So I think all of my life experiences have had me go from being messy to being someone who is more structured and who knows more self-worth and who they are, for sure.
Yeah. One thing in particular that you mentioned was just like you were more quiet and shy, and then you learned how to be loud. Was there a particular moment, or was there like, I'm curious when was the moment you realized, like, I gotta get loud?
Definitely the pivotal life-changing moment in my personality came from me deciding to finally come forward to authorities about all the abuses and financial wrongdoings that were going on in my foster home from my adoptive parents, foster parents, and their sons. And I think the abuse grew so bad where I got to the point where I said, I can't be quiet anymore. I was groomed in this situation, I grew up in it, and I learned how to deal with it. But I started realizing it's getting too bad and I can't. In my good conscience, in my heart, I can't allow this to continue. So I did speak up to my family, and of course, they didn't want to do anything about it. They didn't want to change their ways. And so I couldn't continue to see my severely disabled foster brothers or my foster sisters continue to get abused. And so that was the hardest thing I ever had to do, was stand up to the people who took care of us and housed us and go to the authorities. And I said, I mean, this is the hardest thing I have to do, but at the same time, it's not for me. It's for them. And so that's where I learned how to have my voice and to say, hey, this isn't right. We need help. How do we navigate this? And it was a complete learning experience, and going through court processes, telling complete strangers your dirty laundry and your deepest, darkest family secrets. And, getting subpoenaed, having written statements that are, notarized, getting prepped in the courtroom. It was absolutely, hands down, easily the worst time of my life. But again, I had to keep reminding myself it's not for me, it's for my siblings to get to where they need to be. So that all pushed me, my drive, my love for my siblings really pushed me to have a bigger voice and to speak up when I think something isn't right.
Yeah, I know one of your identities you mentioned was just like being a caregiver. And so I definitely hear that, and like that being that identity as a caregiver, caretaker really is sort of what influenced your ability to sort of like push and advocate. But also I imagine that that identity also influenced maybe how you were processing the grief, and like, because there's so many different losses in there that you mentioned. You were like, there's loss of just your own privacy, and like your like parents that you ever knew, and like friends, and even just maybe even parts of your college experience, because you said did this happen in your 20s, kind of
My
early
my
on in
last year of
college?
college, yeah, is when I came out about
Yeah.
everything and failing all my classes. I went from being a B average student to a straight F student. And faculty noticed, what's going on with you? And it was so hard to finally speak up and say, this is what's going on. I don't know what to do. I need help. But yeah, speaking to the caretaking identity, I think I've always cared for my siblings. I love them and I understand we were all put in that house not on our own will, not with our own decision. And so, kind of becoming the parental figure that my siblings needed, having the care, making sure they're eating, cleaning them up. My severely disabled, brothers, making sure their equipment is all in check and whatnot. I think I was kind of groomed to be a caretaker from my foster parents to take care of the younger kids. But I think genuinely in my heart, I always care and I really think about what that person is thinking of or how a situation could affect them. And so I think obviously being a caretaker for my siblings and wanting them to have all the opportunities that we didn't have growing up and to have the parental figures with different foster families or full time, in home healthcare staffing was essential for me to continue my caretaking for them, but just within my boundaries of what I'm able to do. And then I think like being a caretaker and getting into different sports, getting into volunteer work in my community to keep myself busy and also just try to process everything that I lived through and trying to become like my own person. I think the caretaker identity really took over when I started advocating for my brother's adoptive equipment when they got into ice skating, an adaptive ice skating program. And then being a caretaker by literally becoming a co-guardian of my brothers with my state because I could not in good conscience just let them be. I want to make sure I'm in somewhat control of their staffing, their activities funds, their health care. And also, I want them to have a sense of family. I want them to have me, and so that caretaker role is a legitimate one, but I think also just being a caretaker is someone in a community who genuinely wants to put the people first. So yeah, that's how that identity definitely ties in for me.
For sure. And I'm also hearing just like there's so many systems that you had to you were coming out of a system and then navigating into like a guardianship, which is like a
Adult
totally
care
different.
services, health care, housing services, disability inclusion services, obviously social security disability. There's also health waivers. There's a lot that goes into being a guardian. But by the grace of God, it worked out for us.
That's so great. And I'm wondering just for our listeners there who some listeners might be going through this similar situation of just like I don't even know how to like become a guardian for maybe a sibling, but I like kind of want to, and I don't know how to even start that process, or even like I have the same care or desire to make sure that like siblings or myself or other people are that I love are able to get these services. Were there particular people or were there particular systems or entry points or resources that were helpful for you?
I think number one, the biggest step, and I think that kind of ties into the identity traits as well, one being resilient. But I think a part of being
Yeah.
brave and a part of being resilient is humility. It is being humbled. It is learning that you have your boundaries. You can only do so much and you have to feel embarrassed, humiliated, humbled, and ask for help because only half the time can you do everything, right? Even the strongest, most organized people, they need help. So what I did initially and the advice that I would give to any listener who is trying to navigate my similar situation of becoming a guardian or taking care of foster siblings and whatnot is good old Google. Google in your area resources for adult care services, for child care services, for disability services. Number one, you could go and you could call the police station and you could ask for them to direct you to different offices and local entities. But I think the biggest thing is understanding first off, it's okay to ask for help and to reach out and ask for it, especially from the best places possible. And once you do reach out to different offices, you can get set up with a caseworker who may just be an intake caseworker to intake your information, give you information and set you on the right path, or the caseworker could end up becoming a caseworker for your family once you fill out all the right paperwork, once you get all set up and ready. So definitely explore your resources.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad. Thanks for just mentioning that, and thanks for mentioning that, like, oh, you can actually get connected with like a person who helps you just sort of like coordinate things, like a caseworker or something like that, who helps you kind of like, so you don't have to feel like you're doing it alone, which I think is like probably a common thing that people feel, at least that I hear on the other end, who have gone through some of these experiences of like the stress of like, ah, it's just like a lonely process. And so I wonder if that was also true for you, if it felt just like, oh, I'm navigating this alone, but I'm realizing I have to ask for help.
I absolutely felt lonely. I briefly explain, it was easily the hardest time of my life because I never opened up about my family situation until my senior year of college. And I never brought people over to the house. I never explained anything. I kept my home life very private from my school life and my peers, and I felt like I was living a double life. And when I finally did come out about my family issues to my friends, it was right before I pulled the trigger and went to the authorities about everything that was going on in my family home. I lost good friends. They were honest. They said we don't know how to deal with this. This is heavy. This isn't like a breakup with your boyfriend. This is serious. This is very, very hard violence that we're being faced with. And I also felt, my parents basically kicked me out of the home once I did address these things with them. And I said, can we change, all this stuff? So I was homeless. I didn't have parents. I didn't have a lot of friends that I could lean on. And it was extremely difficult, but I understood again that my sibling safety was my number one priority. And so I think the loneliness ended up sort of being filled because I had so many new lawyers and caseworkers in my life that I could lean on for help. And a few faculty members, a few of my professors, once I did open up from going from a B average student to a straight F student, once I did finally open up about what all was going on, they were giving me so much advice from all these different avenues in my life. And I will never forget when a caseworker told me very good advice. I broke down after a court proceeding, and my parents lied. They tried to make me look like a terrible person for trying to get guardianship. Fun fact, I don't make any money off of being a guardian. My brothers take my money. But anyways, they said all these heinous, horrendous things that I was trying to use the system to gain guardianship over my foster siblings, and I was distressed. I mean, how can you treat people the way you did and then continue to say awful things about me when I'm trying to just be a decent person, trying to be the parent figure that you weren't? So the caseworker said the best way to take care of other people is by taking care of yourself first. And that really hit home because she said, you can't stand trial, you can't face these people without completely breaking down. You have to show that who you are, why you're doing this, and you have to stand your ground. And so that is when I started therapy. I had never gone to therapy on my own accord, and I was set up. So she was great. She was with the child care services, and that caseworker reached out to adult care services and said, I have someone. I'm wondering if you have any pro bono work or any kind of free community resources for her to have some help. And then I was set up with Adult Care Services, Mental Health Association, and I had several sessions with someone. And that did help in the court proceedings to have things written down that I was experiencing post traumatic stress disorder, an immense amount of anxiety going into court proceedings and whatnot. But ultimately, yeah, it was a backbone, to help with our cases, but ultimately that was my first time letting it all out and talking to someone who actually went to school and understood how to talk to me, how to navigate what I was going through. And I think that was amazing to actually tell someone I needed help and then to take advantage of the resources and take that action to get help for sure. But that the loneliness was definitely filled in by all the help that I got just by being brave enough to speak up and say, I needed help for myself.
Yeah, and I actually just I love how you shared about just how there are people, even though you're navigating these systems, there are people there to help, and there are people there who truly care and want to provide like pro bono work, or provide like the lawyers that you mentioned, or like the therapist that actually was really great that connected from childcare to adult services, all these things. And it's making me think about the coping strategies that you had mentioned earlier, and I'm wondering kind of which of your identities, thinking about your different identities, influence kind of how you were thinking about coping, how you were thinking about coping, or how you coped from all these different losses that were happening, or all this stress that you were experiencing as well.
Definitely resilience. Even though at the time I didn't think I was strong, I had post traumatic stress disorder bad. I was uncontrollably crying. Every time my track phone, because that's all I could afford at the time, every time it went off, I just had immense anxiety of like, what lawyer's calling now? What what caseworker needs my help? What subpoena am I getting now? And I had to keep my phone on even during classes because I needed to answer those phone calls. So I think the resilience really started to come in play once I started actually asking for help and how to navigate my own situation and get help in that way. But ask me the question again. We can edit that part out. Sorry, ask me the
Yeah.
question again.
No, I think, I mean, I'm wondering just what identity, because there's so many different parts of you that yes, the resilient part of you and the caretaker part of you. And it's interesting because the caretaker part of you almost had to realize from this resilient part of you that, like, oh, I want to also provide that caregiving or that caretaking for myself in addition to other people. But I also, like, first you have to take care of yourself, and just hearing that from the caseworker, it sounds like it was just so powerful for you. But you mentioned sports and all these different other pieces of your identity, and I'm wondering if that helped you with coping, or yeah.
Well, the coping part. Sorry, I had a brain fart. Okay. So
That's
I
okay.
was like, ask the
Yeah.
question again. Okay, coping.
Coping. Yeah.
So how I was able to cope with all of that, I think was really turning to the resilience aspect of my identity and understanding that, hey, I chose my family. I chose my siblings and I chose how I wanted us to live our lives moving forward. How can I do that? This is now, life is crazy now. I'm extremely stressed. How can I make it through all of this? Getting set up with a therapist, talking to a stranger after never telling your best friends growing up how things were in your house. It was difficult at telling caseworkers, getting written notarized statements. But ultimately, I think the therapist that I was seeing at the time said, okay, when you are feeling like you're about to get anxious and maybe you see them in public or something happens, you have to think to yourself logically, because you are a logical person, what is the worst they could do to me right now? I don't live in their home anymore. I am not lying on their behalf anymore. I have all these entities, all these people rallied behind me and my siblings to get us to where we need to be. What's the worst that they could do? So I think leading with logic was extremely helpful for me at that moment because I had to remove the emotions and I had to think clearly, what's my game plan? How can I execute it? And basically remind myself, what's your number one priority? It's getting your siblings to where they need to be. I don't really matter at this moment, and I know that sounds awful, but they are my why. They are my faith, they are my reason. And so I think that resilience started coming out of that coping process and understanding like I wanted to do this for them and I'm going to see it through regardless of what happens to me. But then I think the coping tools were great. Also, breathing techniques and trying to just think ahead and process things, visualize how is this going to happen? If I go into court, if things don't go our way, mentally prepare yourself if they are going to flip out afterwards. Those mental visualizations really helped. And then I think really starting to take care of myself was a great coping mechanism. But it's interesting. I think the coping mechanisms that I learned in my early 20s when I didn't really know who I was, I didn't finish school yet. I took on this immense amount of stress and, hurdles that I had to go through, but I think I didn't know who I was, number one. And I think for low blood sugar, I lost my train of thought again.
That's okay. No,
That's
some
okay.
of this stuff is like there's a lot of things that we are talking about that
Hard
are
to like put it
stirring up
all in one. Yeah.
words. Yeah, yeah.
And I think a
But
lot of people
it
who I think a lot of people who may be listening will understand. Dana and I just took a little break because I said I didn't really know how to formulate my words right here. And I think for any listener who may have gone through a really traumatic family situation like me, it's hard to put in words, okay? You have so many stories, you have so many visuals that are going through your head at one moment. That's called PTSD, okay? And it comes in a flash. I'll admit I have my air conditioner on. I'm getting a little hot thinking about all these things, but that's the thing. Like, coping mechanisms, are great. And I do want to hit home that I think trauma is never 100% healed. It's something that you're never 100% going to get used to. Feeling uncomfortable, getting heated, overthinking and not formulating your speech very well. But I think it's how you handle and how you manage it that's really important. And that's what I learned in therapy. So I think though how untethered to rooted really hits home for me right now in my phase of life is that I had a messy upbringing. Okay, then I bossed up and I got my siblings where they needed to be, and I am living my life how I want to live it.
Yeah, you
Cool.
did.
But now I'm facing kind of unknown territory. I got married last year, just had my 1 year anniversary, and my
Yeah,
husband and I are
congratulations.
preparing. Thank you. My husband and I are preparing the nest now. We are starting to, plan for parenthood. And I think becoming a mother, especially after everything that I have been through, now those coping mechanisms that I learned in my early 20s kind of no longer apply and they're not working. Now that I am a different person a decade later,
Yeah,
actually over a decade,
yeah.
but I am a different person and I am going to be a mom. So the trauma and the worries that I had in my 20s are a lot different than the ones I have now. I was worried about getting
Totally.
my adult siblings, disabled siblings, everyone where they needed to be. And I was challenged and faced with these people who are supposed to be my parents, but now I'm going to be the parent. I'm going to give birth to a beautiful child that I will have to completely start new with, right? So there's a lot of things that in my head that it's hard to formulate. So for you listeners, yeah, we took a little break because I was just like, well, but that's the thing about
Yeah, that's okay.
grief.
Yeah.
That's the thing about grief and trauma is that it still comes up. It still is something that lives with you, but it's how you cope and how you manage that stress and the anxiety that comes. I think that is really important. And that's why I'm thankful that Dana's here to help me talk about these things more openly.
Yeah,
As I'm
of
navigating,
course. Of course.
yeah, as I'm navigating trying to find my own therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think just to, really sum up a little bit of what you said too, it's like I'm hearing that the things that worked for you in your 20s at a time when you were trying to survive your situation are going to be different than the things that you're doing now when you're trying to thrive. You're trying to thrive into motherhood. You're not trying to survive. I mean, from the moms out there, I mean, they sometimes feel like they're trying to survive motherhood as well. But you're in a different phase of life where yeah, some of the coping just is different. And so even hearing you mention that and have the awareness that maybe some of the things that I learned in my 20s, while they are good, and maybe you still use some of the breathing techniques and all of those things to sort of ground yourself, they might have to change. Like sometimes your coping strategies have to change when you realize that they are not working and you're like, they're not working. So sometimes it's like you might need to find something else that feels like a better coping strategy for you, especially when you're in a different phase of life and a different situation. You're not trying to survive in the same way.
Definitely.
Yeah. Does that sound kind of accurate? Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm wondering just yeah. Yeah. Does that bring you anything in particular to mind, or just like definitely the affirmative of totally it's different? Yeah, yeah, it's just different. Yeah. I'm wondering, there's so many amazing things that you mention in your resilience of that are sort of either that kind of sound like practices or routines or even rituals of just being able to be an ice skating. Did you mention something about ice skating? I feel like you mentioned about being an ice skating
Yeah.
coach, or at least helping your brother get equipment, and you also getting into the sport of powerlifting. And I mean, you're also like there are so many different things you do as an advocate. I'm wondering, like, what are some of those things? What are some of those rituals or ways in which you that help you to process just all the feelings, that but are actually things you really enjoy too, or things that you're like finding new identity in as like a power lifter? Yeah.
So resilience led me to become an advocate for disabled sports inclusion. I think the tools that I learned mainly from all of my family trauma was that speaking up, so communication is really important for you to get help, for people to understand you and whatnot. Advocating, obviously, for my siblings and I, all the wrongs that occurred in our house, and advocating what we want and what I think my brothers need in their adult care services. So, communication, advocacy, education, I also think is essential because people need to understand you. And as annoying as it can be sometimes to over explain yourself to someone who you think may not get you or they may not be showing sympathy with you, it's still essential for practice for you in order to move forward with your life. So I think in caring for my foster brothers, I have been a volunteer ice skating instructor for a not for profit organization, adaptive ice skating program, for about 16 years now. And so when my brothers started with the program, I didn't realize that their equipment, it's called a gait trainer. So gait refers to walking, and it's the stand that once you attach the person into it, they are standing upright essentially. So I didn't realize how much advocacy was going to be required for that in order to procure the equipment for him. And then advocating for different entities for donations for our program was essential as well. And then I think when I got into strength training, this was after I had a stint with running. Again, the caseworker for my children, for a caseworker from Children's Services once told me that the best way to take care of others is by taking care of yourself first. So I turned to fitness to really get out a lot of my stressors and to work on myself. It wasn't about losing weight. It wasn't about looking any type of way. Fitness was literally my time to myself and to work on me and to just get out all that aggression and stuff. So when I got into strength training, I had the experience advocating for my brothers and then volunteering for the ice skating program that I'm involved with. I realized that I was controversial. I just trying to compete and missing most of my fingers using adaptive assistive gripping equipment, and there wasn't a space for me. And so I thought, all right, well, I have heard things from differently abled athletes. I think a lot of times if you are discriminated towards, it's easy to be mad. It's easy to say, well, F you, I'm not going to try with y'all then. If you don't have space for me, I'll go somewhere else that does. But in my truest opinion, I thought, Well, rather than having that type of attitude, I would rather educate you and I would allow you to have all the tools to make the changes that I think are appropriate for disabled people to be included. And it was that type of language, it was that type of delivery that allowed me to have a seat on a national committee for USA powerlifting and to again not be resentful, not be negative, not say you're not doing things right, you have to do better. But me coming to the table and having all these resources from Paralympics, how they categorize their swimmers, but that is like the most vast sport for divisions,
Yeah.
to come with all sorts of examples of differently abled athletes that I have found and befriended online, and to say, here are all the tools, here's what I'm asking for. Are you able to work with me and do this? I think that was a pivotal moment in my adult thriving, I guess, life where I said, well, I'm going to take all of my
Yes.
past experiences and just continue to try to make things more positive for other people moving forward, not just for me. I mean, it sucks being told that you don't fit in. It sucks being told that your lifts don't count for anything because you're disabled and you use equipment. But, well, why don't we make that space? Why don't we try to make it easier for the next person to sign up? That way they don't have to advocate, explain, show examples. They can literally just sign up under the division that is set for them. So I think that's how my past experiences absolutely helped shape me to be the person that I am today and to always call out something if it's not right. Again, advocate, educate, communicate. It's all important for sure.
Yeah, I love hearing the ways in which you partner. Like I'm hearing that as like just an aspect of your identity as well of just like I'm going to try to collaborate and partner with you to change this as opposed to like fight you actively about it. Which is just like everyone has a different approach. So I think that that's sort of like what I'm hearing is like there is the fight in there, and but it comes with like how can we change this together, like how can like I have a seat at the table so that like we can actually work together on making the change rib, and it takes people as well having that. You mentioned humility earlier, so like you probably see that if it's something that you possess, you also probably see it in other people, their ability to also potentially have humility and be able to welcome you into to have a seat at the table as well.
Yeah, and I think that kind of partnership, it was almost like a flip side of my situation asking for help with all these different public resources when my siblings and I were going through the hardest time in our family situation. Similar to powerlifting, I came with all of the information and I said, how can we work together? How can you help me? It was almost like mirroring, or I guess like similar to that situation growing up where I said, I need help. I don't know what to do. Here's all the information on all the negative things that are going on in my house. This is my vision for my siblings and I moving forward. What can your office do for me? And I think that that definitely carried on. I just realized that's kind of similar to how I was back then, just in a different, mode now.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think it's beautiful. It does carry over in, and it pivots you from like, that practice of being able to do that. You've had that experience of doing that and being able to apply it into a thriving situation right now that you're in of like, I want to thrive in powerlifting. So like, how do I like meet, how can we meet together so that like people like myself and also other differently abled people can also be able to thrive in the sport of powerlifting, be able to thrive in the sport of ice skating as well. That's awesome. I love it. I love that. I just like, yeah, cool connection. That's cool. I'm wondering, just what are some other maybe wisdoms or things that you are realizing that have to change as far as coping as you enter into or you're thinking about motherhood? What sort of things are sort of coming up as in terms of what you're thinking about? Since, your identity as a caretaker is also like a lot of motherhood is a lot of caretaking. So I imagine that like you're probably thinking a lot about, yeah, like what coping is helpful for you as you enter this new phase.
Not sure if it's a coping mechanism, but I am trying to remind myself and tell myself you were kind of forced to become a caretaker at a young age and groomed to be that, role model for your siblings that you all needed. And now I'm willingly taking on the role of becoming a mom. And so I think, in all honesty, I do have, some resentment towards my foster siblings. 100%. And I'm jealous of some of them. I'll be completely honest because some of them I got adopted, some of them have parents and I don't. And I think that is also very difficult to navigate as I'm becoming a mom because you have to be selfless 1000%. There's no resentment. You are making this decision willingly. It's not like you were groomed for it. It's not like you're, being thrown into it. You are willingly going for this. So I have to keep reminding myself I just want to be the best mom. So that's it. But for coping mechanisms and things that I've learned in the past that are still helping me now, definitely breathing techniques, definitely thinking logically, and then thinking through worst case scenario, best case scenario, just mentally preparing myself for any kind of situations that might arise during, motherhood or getting ready for it. And I think coping mechanisms that I would like to learn is how to better manage my stress and then how to better accept all that has happened to me. I think I was so focused on getting my siblings right that I didn't completely open up about all of my traumas. I did surface level things with the therapist I was seeing through the adult care mental health association, but I never hit home all of my traumas. And so that is why now at the ripe old age of 33, almost 34, I have decided to seek therapy help again. And this time, really focusing on family childhood trauma because I want to learn better tools and really, really actually address my own hardships. So I think number one is going to be, again, communicating, advocating, and just really
Yeah.
hitting home the purpose. And I'm not doing this for really just me now. I'm also doing this for my future child. I want to be a good mom. I don't want to ever be anything like the way that I was raised. And I don't want my past to dictate how I treat my child in the future. So these are all coping mechanisms that I'm trying to navigate. But again, it's all kind of like coming at you from a
Yeah.
lot of different angles.
No, but I think I'm hearing just like what are it was a question I was going to ask you anyway about like what's the most important thing you've learned in being with and processing your grief. And so I really appreciate you mentioning the areas in which you sort of like I still have more growing and healing to do, and these are the areas where I want to like do that. And I guess a similar question in terms of just healing is like I'm wondering what's been one of the most important things to know about healing for you.
I've said this a few times. I think in the process of healing, it is never 100% healed. It is never 100% out of your mind. We're good. We'll move forward. I think trauma and immense anxiety is always going to be there, but it's how you learn how to cope and really control all of those feelings, how to control those thoughts when they're coming up. Don't spiral, think logically, whatnot. I think those are the important tools that help you navigate moving forward from something. I don't want to say fully heal, but like, how do I manage myself in this type of situation? And how can I move forward living my life, without as much heavy guilt or as much heavy feelings? So definitely it changes for sure. And
Yeah,
life comes in
yeah,
waves. So do our hormones. So, we can go through phases of trying to practice all of these coping mechanisms we've already learned, but then you might be triggered and then boom, you kind of spiral and you go down a rabbit hole again. So I feel like just understanding that's life, that's okay. It's okay that today it hurt more than it did last year. but you have to make sure that your coping mechanisms are also adapting to who you are at that moment and what your environment is like. So if work gets super stressful and you start getting triggered, I personally have PTSD induced nightmares when I'm very stressed. I will have exact recounts of things that I've seen or experienced when I was a kid, and I will dream them. I will, or visualize them when I'm sleeping. And so those never go away. And depending on how stressful my job is, those things happen. But what am I doing about it to cope with it? Am I still doing my breathing exercises? Am I still visualizing and understanding that this is a part of me? Am I accepting that, hey, I can move forward from this? It's one bad night. Life still moves on. I'm going to cope with this, manage this. And if I can't, then I'm going to reach out for more help and learn more tools. So,
Yeah, and I hear so many like thanks for sharing that. I just feel like I hear so many of the practical pieces of like pivoting into like how do you adapt now into like coping. And one thing that was sort of coming up for me as you were mentioning, like of course we've talked a lot about different traumas or different grief and loss and like the healing pieces, the things that you had to do to sort of like survive. But also like I think there's another theme I've sort of been hearing as you've been sharing in your resilience aspect of your identity, of just like really dreaming and hope and visioning into something different, which I think is actually really beautiful when you talk about like this is like my why, like and making sure that like my foster brothers and my foster siblings have what they need, and don't, and dreaming into something bigger for them or better for them, or just allowing them to be able to have the experience of going ice skating or whatever it is, right? I am curious about that more of just like it's not like what's the opposite of trauma, but it's almost like if you think about like
what's my
um,
driving force? Yeah.
yeah, like thinking more of like, like what are you visioning into? What are you dreaming into? What are you hoping into?
I think number one, I always thought I just want love. I want us all to be loved. I want us to feel loved. I want us to be taken care of. And I want us to be in a situation where we do feel safe, where, we have all the opportunities. I want to be treated like everybody else, basically. Whether I'm disabled, whether I'm a foster kid, whatever, I want to be treated and have the same opportunities as everybody else. So that was always my driving force for my siblings. And my one disabled brother, he does horseback riding. He does a little day job. He'll package jewelry boxes. He does ice skating, all sorts of activities. And so it was hilarious because last summer I was like, all right, we're going to do the adapted ice skating program. There's a pool in my area where they actually raise the pool floor for people in wheelchairs, and it's an adaptive pool. Yeah. So I was like, we're going to do that. He goes, I'm tired. You make us do too much. And I was like, what? What? And my husband was like, yeah, but like, she's a really good sister because she does make you guys try everything. There's no limitation in my mind. I think you can do anything adaptively, but really faith, and it's something that I want to get more comfortable talking about. So, my parents, a part of their abusive ways was that they would parade us around to different churches to locally and socially look like they were really good people and that they were religious. They adopted all these kids, but then they were abusive when we went home. So I personally never believed in the things that I learned in the church. I went to, again, they did this not for the right reasons, but they took us to like a Russian Orthodox Catholic church. They took us to a Christian church. They took us to a Baptist church. So, anyway, I never believed in anything that I practiced because of the way that I grew up and what I was living with. But when my siblings initially were removed from my parents' home, I had no contact with them because my last name was still attached to their last name. And I had to go through the process of being a foster parent. So, all the clearances, the application process, all the jazz. And I was only 22. And That was my first time in my life I actually prayed to God, and I actually wholeheartedly surrendered myself, I guess. And I said, if you even take my life, I would give it to make sure my siblings are going to be okay. And I need to believe in you. I need to believe that you're going to watch over us and all these different things. So I think that's my first time actually believing in God. And by the grace of God, all my siblings ended up where they needed to be. And we won in court and all these different things. So for me, I think faith and believing in something, believing in what you're doing absolutely carried me through. And then always keeping my eye on the vision for the life of me, but for the life and lives that I want my siblings to have. Always keeping in mind that vision of what you want is extremely important. And that's a very good driving force for you to continue to be resilient, to cope, and keep doing what you're doing for sure.
Mm. Wow, I love hearing about how, yeah, I love hearing that story about like how spirituality and specifically faith really opened up just more for you and like I don't know, like visioning into something bigger than yourself. Because sometimes it feels like yourself isn't like, it's like I can do a lot, but then like it kind of goes back to kind of what you were saying in the beginning of the episode. It's like I need help. It can't just be me. And so like it's just like it sounds like almost like another iteration of that, not just socially from like I need help from the system and I need help from other people to help me because it can't just be me, but then
I need
spiritually,
help
a spiritual
spiritually
aspect
to
of
keep me
yourself.
going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, and
And one thing,
wow.
well, one thing I do want to touch on, since we're kind of on the topic of faith, finding ourselves, coping, one thing that I want to thank you for, other than having this podcast, me being a guest, is that so the title of your podcast is Untethered to Tethered. And you gave me a little of a briefing before our meeting, and you said we're going to talk about grief, how we cope with things, and really center it more catered towards your situation. And I thought to myself, like grief, the first thing you think of is if someone in your family has passed away, and it's a great love, it's a great loss. And part of me is thinking, I've never really experienced grief because I have my siblings and they're great, they're where they need to be. But then I thought, I think it is normal. They are the only parents I've ever had. So when I first was kicked out of their home and facing them in trial, I felt lonely. I felt absolutely alone and empty and whatnot. And I think that did turn me towards faith. But I think for so long I was so mad at my parents for how they were and why they couldn't come to their senses and be decent people. But at the same time, I did have a great loss. I lost the only parents and parental figures I ever had. And so I think that was a great loss that I had to navigate on top of all of my family stuff. And that's something that you helped point out is, grief comes in a lot of different ways and a lot of different packages. And it's a good thing to recognize that. And especially now that I'm in my 30s and I recognize that, wow, I went through grief, like losing my parents. That's another topic that I definitely want to explore and try to get help navigating moving forward because I didn't realize it was a thing until recent.
Totally. I mean, yeah. I mean, this is something we've talked about on this podcast, maybe in other episodes of like disenfranchised grief. And I'm not sure if you've heard that term, but just like this grief that kind of goes invalidated or unsupported or unacknowledged by society, by people. And so sometimes it's like, oh, people don't really recognize that like there can be a grief around leaving a situation that actually ended up being like for the best, but there's still like a loss there. And so there is this sort of like grief that still is does need to be acknowledged and
Emptiness.
that
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there's a disruption, like there's still a disruption that happened in the family, right? And so there's a lot of disruption that happened before, but it's still like this is, yeah, things had to change. And so with any sort of change, sometime change or loss or difference in your situation, grief might also arise as a result of that. But sometimes it's not always like acknowledged as like that loss, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And also, yeah, I'm I'm encouraged to hear that you recognize it too as like something that is like, like maybe I would explore that more too. That's something to think about for the future. As we sort of wrap up, I'm asked all of my guests this of just this question to sort of dispel myths about this topic. And one of the questions I ask is, what do you wish people knew about this topic? And I think there's a lot that you've mentioned, but I'm also wondering, if it's not that question, what do you wish you knew earlier when you were younger that you now know about this topic?
I think it's amazing how different of a person I am now compared to when I was in my early 20s. Again, no one knows who they are in their 20s. I
Yeah.
think I wish I would have known back then what I believe now, that every single body on this earth is capable of doing anything they want to do. It's just that you have to advocate, communicate, educate, but you might have to do it adaptively. I mean, I didn't go to each office and ask to speak to whoever directly. I just was scatterbrained and I called around and I said, I need help, help me. But I think understanding that you are capable of doing anything, baby girl, you just need to actually come out about it and be brave about it. And the worst thing that's going to happen to you about coming forward is your nerves. You know, people will help you, people will try to navigate, people will try to help you process everything. The worst thing you're facing right now is yourself. So I think that is, I would go back and tell myself, you're capable of anything, but you need to speak up and you need to own that and you need to literally go for it, because nobody else knows your situation. No one else is going to stand in there and do everything for you. It's you. So I think that is extremely important to keep in mind. And then keep the goal in mind. Keep faith that you are capable of doing it. Fake it till you make it, whatever, but just keep reminding yourself, because I think there is a saying that, saying things makes it become an action, and then the action makes it become a realistic thing. So I think that positive reinforcement is absolutely an important tool.
Mm, yeah, yeah, it's like these affirmations, yeah, that lead to action. Lexi, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing so much of your experience and everything that you have experienced, yes, but also resources that you navigated and these tools and what worked and what didn't work. It's just such a wealth of knowledge for people who also might be facing the same thing. So I hope that all my listeners out there, that you feel encouraged by Lexi as well and everything that she shared. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself. So as we wrap up, if our listeners would like to connect with you, please let us know if that's okay with you. Is
Yeah.
that okay with you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so great. And so the best way for them to connect with you is Instagram. Is that correct?
Yep. My Instagram handle is Lexi Adaptive Athlete.
Perfect. Okay. You ready to hear from Lexi? You can connect with Lexi at Lexi Adaptive the Athlete. I will also put it in the show notes so that you can take a look. Lexi, thanks so much again for today. I'm so grateful to have you on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Untethered to Rooted is produced and hosted by me, Dana Darty. Original music was composed and performed by the ever-talented Daniel Dickinson. Thanks so much to our guests for sharing with us today. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And follow us on social at Untethered to Rooted. And if you didn't like it, what podcast? Dana who? Until next time, take and give good care.